today's training. My name's Fiona and I'm going to be talking about Harlequin Hotels and Resorts and their investment model. First of all, I just want to take you through a brief agenda of what we're going to go through today. Harlequin's business model, their track record, the brand associations, how the company has evolved, ultimately how they have survived through a recession, how they've grown through a recession, and how we know that their product is going to be able to deliver. We're also going to cover a selection of the resorts and also, more importantly, the individual buying process. How does it work for each person, and more importantly, a projection of the likely income that they could be receiving. So, Harlequin Hotels and Resorts, what do they do? Ultimately, they have identified a gap in the market. They've looked at the Caribbean as a destination and noted that although it receives a huge amount of tourists per year, and more importantly, a huge amount of repeat tourists, the service that's offered is not necessarily comparable with other areas of the world. Let's look at Harlequin's business model. Harlequin have chosen to develop hotels in the Caribbean. Those hotels are going to be 5-star hotels offering luxury accommodation to the holiday makers. What Harlequin offer to clients is to buy an individual unit. Now that unit can be a villa or an apartment. But importantly, the investor is going to make money from it in 2 ways. First of all, by capital growth, because the value will increase. Second of all, by way of a rental income. Just to give you a little bit of background about Harlequin, first of all, I do think it is very interesting that they are a family-run firm, and that is reflected along different parts of the business model. Harlequin Property also have UK offices, which we do take a lot of comfort in terms of clients can pick up the phone or visit the offices independently themselves. Harlequin are also the second largest employer of St Vincent and the Grenadines, and that is just one example as to the good relationships that Harlequin have, not just in the countries that they develop in with the governments, but also the individual people. Harlequin have developments across the Caribbean, Barbados, St Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominican, St Lucia, as well as this new concept, the Quinn or H hotels. The important thing about the business model is that once you understand that, you can then apply it to each of those destinations. Let's look at Harlequin's track record. How do we know that they are going to be able to deliver on the promises that they have made from the beginning? Their track record ultimately is Buckman Bay, the first resort that is opened in St Vincent and the Grenadines. It opened in August 2010 and has ultimately been delivering on that 5-star service that Harlequin have set out to achieve. We've also got the high quality brand associations, which we're going to go into later, but also more importantly from the point of view of an investment, we have the substantial increases in value. Now the example I have is not one of the biggest or the best units, albeit it is a beachfront unit, but it's only a 1-bedroom villa. That 1-bedroom villa was originally bought in 2006 for £105,000. That unit is now reselling at £365,000. So you can quite clearly see that the investor there has made a huge amount of money in terms of capital growth. Now, why have Harlequin chosen the Caribbean as their destination of choice? Don't forget that this is an investment for Harlequin as well, so they need to be sure that the areas they have chosen are going to deliver. Well, if we look at the Caribbean as a destination, it has 365-day sunshine. Ultimately, what that means is 365-day tourism. This is an investment for Harlequin. It's important for them that the investment is working every day of the year. Keeping looking at the Caribbean as a destination, we can also look at the type of customer base that is attracted there. Now, predominantly, we're looking at the AB1 clients. When you holiday to the Caribbean, it is by no means a cheap holiday. We're looking at the luxury market. So as an investment for Harlequin, it's working every day of the year, but also really advertising towards that top end of the market. What do we get when we buy with Harlequin as an overview? Ultimately, what is included within the contract? First of all, the investor owns the unit, be that an apartment or a villa, freehold. Now, it's very important at this stage that your clients are aware of the fact that although it's owned freehold, they don't necessarily make any personal decisions in terms of location or decor of the unit. However, the fact that it is owned freehold does mean that the client has the option to resell the unit prior to completion, at completion, post-completion. It's entirely up to them. So importantly, Harlequin give their clients that flexibility. Harlequin also sell their units at a 50% market discount. So what we can do as individuals is actually research other similar type units in those individual areas and show that yes, Harlequin are offering them at a 50% discount compared with today's prices. What we could also do is project what those prices could be in the next 3 to 4 years, but ultimately we see that as a risk, so we like to use today's market value. Now this next bit is the bit that gets people excited. What about the income that Harlequin guarantee? 10% is guaranteed by Harlequin, 10%. So it's a huge amount in terms of if we compare it to other more traditional investments. But importantly, that 10% income is guaranteed for 0 to 5 or 10 years. So let's think about that and potentially compare it to other investments. A 10% guarantee for 10 years. Ultimately, that's 100% of the capital back. So you'd think that it's very attractive. I'm sure that you'd get a lot of contracts through at that, but you'd be wrong. The majority of contracts will actually come through with a 0 or 2 year guarantee requested. The reason for that? Investors want to get to the next stage, the 50-50 net room rate share. Now, this is where it's important that Harlequin have chosen the Caribbean as their destination to develop in. This is where it's important that the Caribbean attracts 365-day tourism at the top end of the market, because our investors' income is going to be determined by how often that unit is used and how much that user is prepared to spend to stay there. Now, we're going to take you through some projections later on, but it's at this point that typical yields are looking to be round about the region of 20%. Harlequin also offer 30 days free usage. To be perfectly honest, it's more of a bonus. The majority of people don't actually buy that particular unit with the usage in mind. It is more bought very much as an investment. Having said that, unfortunately, if you do take the option of buying via your SIP, then we're not able to include that 30 days free usage. So it really is very much more of a bonus. I mentioned earlier on the A-type cabana in Buckman Bay, so we do have a proven resale platform with Harlequin, and that is very, very important that we provide clients with that exit strategy. Having said that, it's not necessarily the best way to make money with this investment. Now, this is the important part. Harlequin are not like other developers. What would a developer traditionally do? They would get to completion, hand over the keys and say, thank you very much for your purchase, enjoy your investment, I hope you make a lot of money, we're off to build another one. Harlequin are different, because when they get to completion, they give you 50% of the income. Who do you think takes the other 50% of the income? Harlequin. So in order for Harlequin to make a profit, the hotel has to be running at maximum occupancy, charging the maximum nightly rate that is possible. Quite rightly so, investors take significant comfort and reassurance from that, because in order for the investment to work at its full strength for Harlequin, it has to be running at full strength for the investor. Let's talk about security. There's been a worldwide recession. How do we know that this investment is safe? Now, the first 3 points that you can see on the slide there are important. Harlequin Property are a UK-based family-owned company. They are one of, if not the largest developer in the Caribbean. And as mentioned before, there is support not just by the local governments, but by the people as well. The two main ones that I want you to focus on are at the bottom. Firstly, the investment is suitable with a UK SIP. Now, a SIP is a self-invested personal pension. And what that ultimately means is that the Harlequin product has been scrutinised by HMRC, by the individual SIP providers that accept the product at the moment. And ultimately they have said, we like this product, we will allow it to be used within the pension market. The next point that you can see is, again, the most important. I want you to focus on the last point of the screen, the fact that all land is unencumbered. Let's look at a traditional developer again. A traditional developer would source their piece of land. They've got the hotel model. There's a gap in the market for a true 5-star hotel. Ultimately, they would approach a bank, take out a mortgage on that piece of land, and start to build. Ultimately, we then have to reapproach the bank for further funding as we start more building and more development. But what happens when that bank then says, sorry, there's a global recession, we don't lend money to anyone at the moment? That developer has no choice. They have to down tools. They can't afford to pay for their labourers. They can't afford to pay for their material. And ultimately, that bank has a charge on their land. Let's now look at how Harlequin operate differently. They identify the gap in the market. They need to provide a 5-star hotel. When they source their piece of land, they buy it outright. They don't rely on the bank for further funding throughout construction. So ultimately, that control and no reliability on the third parties has ensured that Harlequin have not just survived through the recession, but actually grown through it as well. If we then go down the line in terms of time, the hotel has now been built. It is ready, it's complete, it has people staying in it. And this valuation was actually prior to completion. $200 million is what Buckingham Bay is valued at. It's a Red Book valuation that is carried out on the whole site, and we're actually in the process of going through the second, more updated, now the development is complete at the moment, but it's anticipated that that valuation is going to be anywhere from $400 million upwards. I want you to remember that point because I'm going to come back to it later, the fact that all of Harlequin's land is unencumbered. Okay, let's look at some of the brands that Harlequin work with. It's also quite a good opportunity to also look at the facilities amongst all of the resorts. So the first facility we can look at is a sports academy. Sports is tremendously popular throughout the Caribbean, and the hotels up there need to provide suitable standards of sports. Harlequin like to do things a little bit differently. Their development in St. Lucia doesn't just have a golf course. It has a signed golf course by the wonderful Gary Player. But the reason they like to do things differently isn't that they just have a signed golf course by Gary Player. It's not just designed by Gary Player, but they will also be opening within the resort the world's first ever Gary Player hotel. What I've got here is a screenshot from Gary Player's website. So you can literally see, if you click on it through to corporate affiliates, you can see just at the bottom there, Harlequin property, right next to the big names, Coca-Cola, Rolex, MasterCard. The next facility that Harlequin have isn't just a soccer school, but it's a branded soccer school. Liverpool Football Club run the soccer school within Buckingham Bay, and that's a very, very important brand because, again, they're an international brand. So regardless of football politics, we know that Liverpool Football Club is recognised worldwide. Now again, some of the images that I've got here are very, very interesting. We've actually got the trainers from St Vincent and the Grenadines who are taken across to Anfield and trained the Liverpool way. So here we've got another shot of the soccer club in action. The final brand that we've got isn't just a tennis academy. You'll have noticed that Harlequin like to do things differently. It's a Pat Cash signed tennis academy. Pat Cash, similarly to Gary Player, isn't just opening his own tennis academies across each of the different developments, but there will also be a Pat Cash hotel. That hotel will be in Las Canas and Buckingham Bay. And again, I've got some shots here, or a shot at least, of Pat actually playing in his tennis academy in Buckingham Bay. Now just take a moment to look at the background of that image there. You can really see that it is the Caribbean. Now, all of these facilities within the Sports Academy have already proved to be tremendously popular. And if you keep an eye out in the specific travel advertisements, you'll see that sporting holidays are being advertised to the correct people. And it's that brand awareness that is very important. Yes, they have the facilities that are top end and better than anywhere else in the Caribbean, but we also have the brand awareness to go with it. Let's look at other areas of the resorts now. First of all, one of the restaurants that Harlequin have is a Trader Vic's restaurant. Again, an international brand that will be featured within each development that Harlequin have. Now, Trader Vic's, for those of you that don't know, already have an international presence. Again, I recommend that you go onto their website, see some of the other hotels that they are actually associated with. But I've got here a shot for you of a Trader Vic's restaurant, and you can really see how it's not just suited to Dubai, the States, parts of Europe as well, but you can really see how that image will fit well in the Caribbean. The next brand we've got is quite an interesting one because it's not a brand as such, it's almost something that Harlequin have created themselves. But I've included it because I really wanted to put across to you just how different the facilities and how differently Harlequin operate. The Harlequin Performing Arts Academy is a totally new brand name, but it's something that Harlequin have created to really advertise towards new markets. What I've got here are some images of the people that run the Performing Arts Academy. Now, the Performing Arts offers lessons for children, for adults. They also provide evening entertainment. So again, we're really starting to look at brand new markets that we can bring in. There is literally no other competition for this worldwide, let alone just the Caribbean. So Harlequin really like to take control of that niche market. The next brand we've got, again, is one that Harlequin have actually created themselves. Naturally, each resort will have a spa within it. Those spas will be run by the internationally acclaimed S-Spa. Again, they're a UK-based company. Please do take a moment to look at S-Spa's website because, again, you'll see them affiliated with lots of the top names hotel around the world. What Harlequin are doing with this brand, Alaya, is, again, something a little bit different. Whereas each resort will have a spa within it, what Harlequin are also going to include is a spa hotel. Now, just to give you an idea of the typical client that Harlequin are going to be advertising towards with this, I've got an image of the smallest unit available. This unit is a 3,500 square foot villa. Private swimming pool, private bedroom obviously, private massage area, which is also your private dining room. Now, just stop and think a moment at the type of customer that is actually going to be attracted towards that. So again, we can really recognise that Harlequin are working with the AB1 type of client. Let's move the timeline on now. Harlequin have set up a successful hotel and they need to ensure that it's being sold at the back end, that they're working with the correct travel companies. And that's exactly what we have got, not just some travel companies, but the best travel companies. Just to give you an idea of that, you can see some of the logos here of some of the UK companies that Harlequin are working with. Kuoni, Carib Tours, Virgin Holidays. They are the best and again the AB1 names that we look towards in terms of travel. Okay, so that's the brand sorted. Let's now look at the evolution. How have Harlequin grown? But it's also quite a good opportunity to actually look at the different companies within the whole group. So the first company we can look at is Harlequin Property. Harlequin Property are the UK-based company. Essentially, Harlequin Property is almost the sales arm for this company here, Harlequin Hotels and Resorts. Now, this is the important company. This is the company that is based in the Caribbean, that owns the land, that runs the hotel. This is the company that we as clients have the contract with. Let's think about the reliability and control again that Harlequin like to keep. When Harlequin are building their hotels, originally they were actually thinking of bringing in a third party to manage the hotels, an expert, if you like, in terms of a hotel management company. What ultimately they decided, they didn't want to lose that control to a third party. So they created their own management company. Here you can see some of the CVs and background that our staff have. Now you can really pick out some of those names: Viceroy, One and Only, Beverly Hilton, Nikki Beach, the Mandarin Oriental. Pick out those names and have a think about the type of experiences that the staff have had there and the type of experiences they can actually bring with them to Buckingham Bay. Now it's thanks to those experiences that the staff bring with them that Harlequin are giving the true 5-star service that they promised they would in Buckingham Bay. This is where it starts to get very impressive. Harlequin have sold the units, they've built the units, and they're now running a successful hotel. They need to ensure that that hotel is full with paying guests. Let's think about control and reliability. Are Harlequin willing to rely on those third parties, those travel agents, to make sure that the hotel is full? No. So what did they do? They set up their own company, Harlequin Travel. Now, we can also now start to think about it from a client's point of view. The client is booking a holiday with Harlequin Travel and staying with them in a Harlequin hotel. What I've got here is some screenshots for you, just so you can see the people that Harlequin Travel are working with. It's not just travel. We already know that we've got Kuoni, Carib Tours, Virgin. You can also see Expedia, Saga, BA Holidays as well that Harlequin work with. And you can also see that they're now gradually expanding in the US as well. I've also got some screenshots for you. So again, we can see Buckman Bay on the Kuoni website. Please do use these websites. It's useful to see how much is charged, but also to see how much other hotels in that area charge as well. So we can use Kuoni, Carib Tours, a very impressive travel agent, Virgin Holidays, again, one of the more well-known ones in terms of the high street, and one of Harlequin's newer signings, not just Thomas Cook, but Thomas Cook Signature. Okay, Harlequin have now sold the units, they've built the hotel, they're running the hotel, they've ensured that the back end is also complete in terms of Harlequin Travel. How is the brand going to continue to grow? Can it continue to grow? This is where it starts to get really clever. Naturally, the next step is for Harlequin to create their own airline. And that is exactly what they're doing. By the end of 2011, the beginning of 2012, Harlequin will have bought and have in action 2 aeroplanes. Now you can see they're the smaller aeroplanes they used as inter-island aeroplanes. But here we can really start to recognise how Harlequin are again taking control of that market. Let's again look at it from a holidaymaker's point of view. Traditionally, when you book a holiday, you go to Barbados and return, or St. Lucia and return. What is currently not offered in terms of package holidays is a holiday that includes visits to multiple islands. Now, Harlequin are going to be the first company that provide those multi-island holidays, and they do that through Harlequin Air. So again, we can look at it from the customer's point of view. They're booking with Harlequin Travel. They're then going to be flying with Harlequin Air, staying with Harlequin in each of their hotels around the Caribbean. So they really have managed to corner the market, if you like. Okay, hopefully we understand enough about the business model. We can see that Harlequin have good brand awareness within their companies, but now let's also look at the destinations that Harlequin have chosen. So the first one we've got is St. Lucia. The development is called the Marquis Estate, and you can see there's a lovely aerial shot there and coming up as well. Here I've got a map of St. Lucia, and I've really included that just to show the size, I suppose. It's a little bit bigger than the Isle of Wight, although interestingly there are 2 airports. And you can see the Marquis Estate is just on the northern east side. It's interesting because the international airport in St. Lucia actually comes to the one that you can see in the south, yet the majority of tourism is on the northwest, north and northeast side. So why invest in St. Lucia? Why have Harlequin chosen St. Lucia as their destination? Let's look at the third point down. 305,000 visitors during 2010. It's a 10.4 increase, which is 10.4% increase, which is pretty impressive. But what we can also start to do is compare St. Lucia to other islands. So, for example, Barbados in the same time period welcomed just over 560,000 visitors. What we can see from that is that St. Lucia has an established market, but it also potentially can go a little bit further as well. If I can now draw your attention to the bottom bullet point on that slide as well, you're buying in at an early stage. Now, this is a good opportunity to talk about how people and investors have traditionally bought with Harlequin. When they first release a development, the prices are launched at a very low area. As we get close to completion, we get more information about the site, but we also get a price increase every 3 months. So ultimately, by buying in at the early stage, you are waiting longer for completion, but you're making the most in capital growth. St Lucia is still at an early stage and it's not going to be completing until 2013-2014. So again, we've got some pretty good shots for you. This is an aerial shot of the Marquee estate, and I really just wanted to show to you the size of the development. We can also see a computer-generated image of how the Marquee estate will look. You can see the Gary Player golf course running through the centre. The rest of the site will be divided into small villages, and you can see on your left-hand side how they're set up on the one side of the valley. Interestingly enough, the other side of the valley is actually the equivalent of National Trust land, so it can't be bought or built on. But interestingly enough, the government have actually said, please use it within your site. Imagine the nature walks and the horse trails, the viewpoints, etc. you'll be able to have from that point. I've also included some computer-generated images for you. I just really want you to imagine that from the top of the hillside. Again, this is a Gary Player 6-bedroom villa, so it's not one of the smaller units that Harlequin offer, but I just want you to have an idea of how the site will look and how the different units will be laid out. What I've got here are some rental comparables sourced from hotels currently in St Lucia. You can see that they're ranging from about £150 to about £650 per night. Now, if I'm honest, when I originally found them, I thought it would be a little bit higher than that, particularly at the bottom end. It was only after I realised that the place where I'd sourced them from, the Kuoni brochure, actually quotes per person. So in order for us to get the true value of the room, we actually need to double that 150. Just so you know as well, when I took those prices, any extras or any transfers, flights, etc. were taken off. So what you can see there really is the bare bones for accommodation only. I've already shown you computer-generated images of how the Marquee estate will look. I just really wanted to show you how Buckman Bay in St Vincent and the Grenadines is looking now it's up and running and complete. So first of all, this is one of the beachfront villas. And then the interior. This is actually, interestingly enough, a show home. So you can see the furniture has been vastly improved since then. But the reason I kept it in was just to really emphasise the height of that villa. It's not by any means the biggest villa, it's a 2-bedroom plantation villa, but it's still a reasonably good size, I think you'll agree. Everything within Buckman Bay, from the uniform that you can see on the waiter to the pictures on the walls, the tray, the glasses, the lampshades, everything within Buckman Bay has been sourced directly by Harlequin. Everything has been sourced and created with the purpose of Buckman Bay. So there we go, that's a much better interior shot of one of the villas. You can really see how that furniture is improved. There we've got some of the Infinity beach pools. They opened in 2011. We'll also have a marina to the front of Buckman Bay as well. Here we have a nice one overlooking from the spa, so you really do get a good feel of how the site is set up. Villas overlooking lakes and water features. The new restaurant that's opened, again, you can see that's on the beachfront. Okay, we've now hopefully got a good understanding of Harlequin's business model, their track record, the brands that they work with, how the company has evolved and where they want to get to in the future. We've also got a good understanding of the areas where Harlequin develop. We know that they like to take the good pieces of land, the Marquee estate. We know that they build to a very high quality, the Buckman Bay development. How does an individual buy? Now, the unit I'm using in this example has a purchase price of £200,000. It's not necessarily the entry level, but it is closer to the average. Day one, Harlequin request a reservation fee of £1,000. 45 days later, the balance of a 30% deposit is required. So you can see there, in total, Harlequin have taken £60,000. Now, how do we raise that deposit? We've got 3 different options. The first is by cash. Our investor may have all or an element of the deposit as cash available. The second is a SIP. So the investor may choose to put one or multiple pensions into a SIP wrapper and use that as the deposit. The final method is finance. The investor may choose to borrow an element of the deposit, and Harlequin can assist them with paying back any monthly interest payments. This is the important bit. No further funds are required from the investor until completion. The remaining purchase price is broken down into stage payments. Now, importantly, those payments only become due when the individual stage has been physically completed. So what literally happens is the client will receive an invoice, 25% of your purchase price is now due, but they are given the option of deferring that payment until completion. If that, and we assume that it will be, that and the remaining payments are deferred, interest is charged. Now, if you remember, I said the way people like to buy with Harlequin is buying in at the early level and waiting for their capital growth to increase. So suddenly, if the investor's then told they have to pay interest for that duration, it's not so attractive. So importantly, that interest is charged but capped for a maximum of 18 months on an apartment and 12 months on a villa. Realistically, what that interest does is adds between 5 to 7% of the purchase price. But again, we have calculators that can show your clients that for you. Just for your reference, here you can see the stage payments broken down into each individual stage as they become due. Let's now look at completion. You'll remember the client originally bought their unit for $200,000. They bought it at a market discount, so realistically, you would expect without any growth in that region for the unit to be worth at least $400,000. For this example, using very prudent figures, we're only showing the property value at completion at $350,000. What else do we owe to Harlequin? We've already paid them 30%, so we've got the remaining 70% to pay. You'll remember that we deferred that and Harlequin charged us an interest. That was capped at 18 months, and for this example, $14,000, so quite prudent figures again. Now at this stage, I'm going to take the assumption that possibly not for a SIPP purchase, but more so for a cash, we might actually want to take back the original 30% deposit. So another 60. So in total, what we need to look at raising is $214,000. Traditionally, we borrow that against the property value at completion. Now let's just push those figures together. We've got a unit value of $350,000, and we need to raise via a mortgage against that property $214,000. Let's look at a very low loan-to-value mortgage, just 70%. A 70% loan-to-value mortgage means that we actually have potentially $245,000 available. So the first thing we can see there is that there's a really good cushion between those numbers, despite the fact I've used a low unit valuation, despite the fact we've taken back the original deposit. We've still got a really good cushion there of $30,000, which is a potential for cashback. Two questions. The cost to the client. Put $60,000 in. Yes, they had to wait for X amount of years, but they've then taken back their $60,000. This is where it gets interesting. How do we raise that mortgage? I want you to cast your mind back to when I said that Harlequin's land is totally unencumbered. What was a piece of land now has a physical building on it. It's now a physical business in terms of people are staying in the hotel and they're booked to stay in the hotel for the next coming months. That business now has a value, and if you remember, its pre-completion value was $200 million US. What Harlequin can then do is borrow against that $200 million US dollar asset to essentially provide the mortgage for their investors. Now, it's important at this stage to note that the investor isn't contracted to take the mortgage with Harlequin, but it's highly likely that they will take that choice because it will be cheaper for them to take the mortgage through Harlequin. Okay, we've taken out a mortgage. Let's now look at the rental income. How are we going to pay that mortgage, and what type of profit can we expect to receive? So we'll stick with the same unit, originally bought for $200,000. If you remember, the mortgage we needed was $214,000. I've slightly rounded those numbers up to $220,000. The interest rate I've used is 8%, and on an interest-only basis, that mortgage would cost $17,600 per year. Okay, for the first 2 years, you'll remember that there's an option of a guarantee available. So this client, I've decided, has taken a 2-year rental guarantee of 10%. So you can see the income coming in, 20,000, the mortgage going out, 17,600. So more than enough, washing its own face, not necessarily making a huge amount of money, but you'd expect that because the mortgage is quite high as we've taken the deposit back. This is where it starts to get interesting at year 3. What type of income can we expect at the 50-50 stage? Now again, I'm going to use very low and moderate figures. The occupancy rate I've only set at 70%. Now remember, the hotel's been running for 2 years. We've got the facilities and brands that we mentioned earlier on, so realistically you'd expect it to be running at a little bit higher than that. The room rate I'm using is £330 per night. Now remember, that's for the room, not per person, but just for the room. What I've used here is 100% occupancy, 365 nights, then found 70% of that figure, and then the investor takes their share. So just to compare that, so let's look at those figures. Where the gross income was 20,000, it's now 42,000. Now this is a very advantageous thing about the product, is that you and your investors can actually look at each scenario and say, well, what if? So what if, for example, the occupancy rate was lower? I'm going to assume that occupancy is just 50%. Highly unlikely, given the facilities and service already provided, but let's assume, let's look at the worst case. So if occupancy is only 50%, our share of the income per year, 30,000. So we've still got plenty in there to pay our mortgage, and we're even making a £12,000 profit per year. Now let's look at it the other way. Let's look at how low the occupancy has to be in order for us to break even. The mortgage costs $17,600 per year. In order to bring that in revenue, occupancy has to be just 29.5%. Now ask yourself, do you think it's realistic that a hotel with Harlequin Travel, Harlequin Air, the 5-star service, the brand associations, the beautiful units, would only run at 30% occupancy throughout the year? Now I've kept this slide until last. It's too good to be true. A very reasonable objection raised from clients. Why are Harlequin doing it? Why are they giving away a 10% guaranteed income? Why are they giving away a 50% share of the rental income? Ultimately, what's in it for Harlequin? Now, what I'm going to look at is Harlequin's income from one unit. I'm using a very low occupancy rate, almost unrealistic, of just 50%. And I'm going to stick with that same £330 a night. From that one unit, Harlequin can expect £30,000 worth of revenue per year. Let's then look at 1,000 units across the development. Harlequin are then looking at £30 million worth of revenue. What we can then assume is 5 different developments across the Caribbean. Harlequin are then looking at a staggering £150.5 million worth of revenue per year. Now the best thing about that number is not only is it unrealistic, occupancy is far too low, the nightly room rate is only of the lowest kind, but that income is only sourced from accommodation. What about the other sources that Harlequin have? Harlequin Travel, Harlequin Air, food and beverage outlets, daily excursions. The final best thing about that number is that Harlequin can only get there with the investors. Their other option is to borrow funds from the bank, but they've seen from other developers that doesn't work. They've seen other developers rely on bank funding and go bust. Taking this route, Harlequin can retain their control, and they can also control the profits that they make at the end. The other reason that I like that number is because Harlequin, in order to keep generating that, can also almost use their existing book of clients. So if we look at a client that's making £30,000-40,000 worth of income per year, where do you think they're going to want to reinvest that money? Of course, back into Harlequin. So it really gives Harlequin that push or that motivation to make sure that their clients want to reinvest with them. Thank you very much. That's the end of the presentation.